Hello, my name is Carlton Cartwright. I'm the Executive Director for the Children's Coalition Incorporated, and we are here today at the Veterans Memorial Center on Merritt Island. And today's date is November the 17th, 2019. And sir, what is your name?
David A. Dubitsky.
Okay, Mr. Dubitsky. And where were you born, David?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay, and what is your address?
Currently it is 275 Cinnamon Drive, Satellite Beach, Florida.
Okay, and when is your birthday? Did I ask you that?
No, December 17th, 1947.
Okay, great. All right, what branch of the service were you in?
The United States Air Force.
All right, and what period did you serve? What were the date parameters?
From May of 65 to May of 69.
Okay, and where were you at the time that you entered the military?
I was in Cleveland.
Is that where you grew up?
That's where I grew up.
Okay, all right. What were you doing before you went in the service?
I was a student at a local community college, and I was working part-time at a paint store.
Okay, so you went in you said 1965?
Yes.
Why did you choose that branch of the military?
Originally I had thought to, although the son of an Army veteran, thought I'd like to join the Navy, but the paint store was next to an Air Force recruiter's office. So
The what was?
the paint store that I worked in
Oh,
was next to an Air Force recruiter's office.
that wasn't fair to you.
No, so I got to know those two sergeants very well.
Okay. Okay, all right. So I guess that did the trick, huh?
That was the eventual outcome. Yes.
Right. So where did you go to basic training?
Lackland Air Force Base in
Okay.
Texas.
All right. And how long was basic training?
6 weeks.
Okay. Do you remember anything about your instructors?
Yes, I do. We had two sets. The first sets actually were dismissed because of some problems that they had with some of the enlistees.
Oh.
And the second set came in and were rather upset because they had just gone through basic with a different unit and were on their, I guess, leave time in between, and were an emergency call-up. So they were not happy to have to come back to work.
Okay.
So, but they took over and
Right.
got us through. So.
Good. Okay, so what was basic training like? How was it?
Oh, very different from the original lifestyle that you had. I was only 17. I graduated from high school at 16, started attending college. It was finding that in and out, so classes were being canceled and things like this. I was rather young to be in a college environment, so I got the part-time job to fill up some of the time that was missing from, and to supplement my income, which was nothing at the time.
Right.
So, and it was a different era. There was a war going on, and had been going on for some time. So.
Okay, all right. Where did you go to for tech school?
It was with Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Right. And what was your MOS?
Well, we didn't have an MOS in the Air Force. We had a code that was basically called Electronic Digital Data Equipment Repairman, which was a 50351.
Okay.
And that was it.
Okay. So you were at Keesler. How long was the tech school?
45 weeks.
Wow.
Yes. It was
Jesus.
quite the education.
Almost a year, huh?
Yes.
Wow, that's the longest one I've heard of so far, I believe. Well, anyway, it's been a while. So, did you go on leave? You went on. I know you took R&R while over that 45-week period.
Absolutely. We had a 2-week leave, which I was able to go home for, and then there was a month between the end of tech school and my assignment in Germany.
Okay. So, up to that point, how did you stay in touch with your family?
By telephone, basically.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, did you went home on leave?
Yes.
Okay. Did you go anywhere else? Did you travel anywhere else while you were on that extended tech school?
Biloxi is in the middle of basically an area that takes you either to New Orleans, which
Right.
was very common for us to go to, or Mobile, Alabama,
Uh-huh.
or even Pensacola, Florida.
Right.
So I did extensively, I had a car, so I traveled between New Orleans and Mobile and Pensacola.
Okay. Cool. Good. All right. So you said you were stationed in Germany.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Where?
Ramstein Air Force Base.
Oh, okay.
A detachment that basically I was stationed at Ramstein, lived on Ramstein, but worked in a bunker, a hill, a mountainside, if you will, a cave that was formerly used by the German Army in World War II as a ammunitions bunker in a little town called Kinsbach.
Huh. Okay.
We converted it after the war to a radar site. So I was what basically was electronic phones, which were new to everyone, because what it turned out to was the touch-tone dialing system,
Uh-huh.
which hadn't been introduced to the American citizens at all, and was used extensively throughout the European theater.
Okay. All right. And how long were you stationed there?
Stationed in Germany, never left that particular area, but the name that for the detachment that I was in, changed several times. So
Really?
right. But even though when I first got there, it was the 615th AC&W Squadron, and then it changed to Detachment 2 of the Headquarters 86th Air Division, and then finally the Detachment 2 of the 601st Tactical Control Wing. But we never left the building or never left the cave.
Really?
Really.
Wow. Up to this point, well, anyway, in basic training and in tech school, were there any casualties in your unit? Or did you have any injuries?
I had no injuries.
Okay.
There were some people that were discharged from having an injury during basic training.
Uh-huh.
But during the detachment in Germany, there were a couple of casualties from automobile accidents and basically other military accidents that happened while on base.
Okay. All right. Okay. So what about traveling around Europe?
Was able to do that rather extensively, having been in an Air Force headquarters squadron and on an active military base where pilots that were coming to and from Vietnam were required to keep so many hours in the air. So was able to catch hops to England, to Italy, well, lived close by to France in Germany, so was able to drive over to France and Spain and things like that. So
Okay.
yes, I saw a lot of Europe.
Tell me about it. Where else did you get to go?
Well, we spent some time, I believe it was the New Year's of 67 that we were in Trafalgar Square in England and got pushed around by the massive crowds that basically gathered there to greet the New Year. But also went into Paris, France, went to the northern part of Italy, spent some time touring East Germany as we were allowed to fly up to Berlin on a hop and then take a bus from West Germany into East Germany to just look around, basically, in uniform, of course.
Right,
We're
right,
not
yeah.
allowed to travel without being in uniform.
Right.
So.
Right. Where else? Did you get down to the Mediterranean at all?
No, basically I had also gotten married during that time, so
Oh.
my wife accompanied me for a period of about 2 years. Having gotten pregnant, she, well, I opted to send her back to the States where she had our first son in Cleveland with her parents and my parents in attendance, and I was just notified of his birth by the Red Cross on a telephone call. So
That was interesting.
yes, it was. What happened that was interesting there was the fact that I had gone to a Christmas party. It was December 25th, and when I got back to the barracks, I had gotten a phone call from the Red Cross, and the lieutenant that had contacted me said that I was the father of a son. And of course I said, well, there was a moment of silence, and he said, "What's the matter? Weren't you expecting a child?" And having been rather young, and also my first child. I said, yes, but he wasn't due till January, at which the lieutenant laughed and said, there is no actual due date, you know. So it happened on Christmas, and I thought for the longest time that I had a Christmas baby, but
Right.
it turned out because of the communications problems and so forth back then, we didn't have the internet or anything.
Right.
It took a while for them to get in touch with me, so he was actually born on Christmas Eve in 1968.
Oh,
so.
okay. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. As I always say, it was my pleasure.
Belatedly, I got you. Yeah, okay. All right. So did the family move back with you, or?
Well, I was 5 months from separation, so I
Oh.
moved back to home and moved on from there.
Okay. So did you see any combat?
Not actual combat.
Good. And apparently you were not a prisoner of war.
No, no.
What do you mean when you say not actual combat?
Well, obviously during that period of time we had commander's calls and so forth, which we were subject to seeing what was going on in the Vietnam theater. And the films and things that they showed were actual combat films, so the wounds and the dropping of bombs and so forth actually gave us a good taste of what was going on, which we were assured was more than the normal civilian or citizen in the United States were going to see.
Okay. And how did you react to that? How did you and your fellow military personnel, soldiers, what was your reaction to that?
I think it was a normal reaction to anybody to see those kinds of things that were happening. We were obviously upset that the war was going on. Like every other soldier, you sign that contract that you go wherever they send you, and obviously those people were sent to an area where their life was in danger every moment that they were stationed there.
Right.
And it made our kind of picnic area look rather sad, but there was absolutely nothing that at that time we could do about it. We had a Cold War going on. We had Germany separated into two factions, East and West. The Soviet-controlled Eastern Front was basically, our job was to monitor and make sure that the Berlin air corridor was kept open, and that the traffic between West Germany was open to get into West Berlin. So we were on the alert in the radar sites to make sure that there was no foreign traffic that was going to invade or stop the flow of supplies going back and forth at that time. So it was a job, somewhat boring, but also most important to keep that theater alive.
Okay. Were you involved in any battle planning?
No, I was not.
Oh, what?
I was in an area that where we had a command center where NATO troops and United States Air Force generals were in a command center, constantly monitoring what was going on, both on radar, a huge screen, and by some of the technicians that were stationed there that were doing manual radar tracking in case the site went down with the electronics or with radar operations. So
What rank were you when you separated finally?
I was a sergeant, but
E3, E4?
E4.
Okay. But what?
Obviously that changed several. The Air Force, having been relatively new at that time, was in a transition, everything from uniforms to ranks to things like this. So some of the people that were E4s at the time were Airman First Class. Some of the rest of us were made sergeants. It made no sense, but you could have a friend stationed on base that was a Airman First, or you were a sergeant because you were off on a detachment. You were all the same, so it didn't matter.
Okay, all right. Did you receive any awards, medals, citations?
The awards that I was lucky enough to accomplish basically were the unit awards. There was a Presidential Unit Award and an Air Force Outstanding Unit Award. Of course, there was a Vietnam era ribbon, and after 3 years, I got the Good Conduct Award, a medal. So.
Okay, good for you. And being overseas in Germany, I guess it was a challenge about as far as, staying in touch with your family, or was it phone or letters or?
Mostly letters. Occasionally I was able to get through on having worked with electronic phones, because we did
Right.
we did make sure that the lines of communications between the Washington switch and the headquarters squadron were always open. So sometimes I was lucky enough to convince the other gentleman on the end that perhaps he could make a phone call for me.
Right.
So I did get through a couple of times to the family while I was stationed there.
Okay, cool. That's good for you. Hey, how was the food while you were in the service anyway?
While I was in the Air Force, so
Yeah.
it was excellent by comparison. In fact, we were in an area that had Air Force bases right around the city of Kaiserslautern, but also Army bases. And most of the time, the Army bases, when we had good chow coming in, we were given steak occasionally, and of course on the holidays, the turkeys and so forth. We were inundated by visitors and busloads of Army soldiers that preferred our cuisine to their own. So I cannot complain about the food that was there.
Right. I remember that. So anyway.
I'm sure you do.
Right, yeah. In your job, was there generally, did you feel or experience a lot of pressure and stress?
Well, what the pressure was to maintain the equipment, obviously, and as I said, that we had everything from radar equipment, and some of us were working on that. I had the telephone equipment was my main concern, and of course we had various exercises. The only stress was during joint exercises between NATO or with the Army and ourselves and the NATO troops in the field. So we had to ensure that all the lines were set and laid and in the various areas. So the only pressure was making sure that our system was up and operational when the major components of the operation were there and were able to communicate freely with the rest of the systems. So that was the only pressure we felt.
Okay, I'm just curious. I'd like to know more about that pressure from NATO, or.
Well, we felt that it was from all over. Obviously, the people in our detachment, being a headquarters squadron, expected us to ensure that everything was operational at all times, so that we were always there with the equipment and making sure that it was being maintained, and that the lines, if perhaps someone inadvertently cut the system or so forth, we were there to repair the lines and ensure that the operation was continued.
Okay, all right. Do you feel as though you had all of the supplies that you needed
Yes.
during your entire tour?
Yes,
Your entire career in the military?
Yes, we were always well and kept up in every aspect of that. So.
Okay. Tell me two of the most unusual events, or things, a couple of instances that stick out in your mind during your military career.
Well,
Either humorous or unusual,
well,
take your pick.
we ran the gamut of all of it. I was in Europe when the Six-Day Israeli War broke out, and obviously close enough to where, while we were there, we were on alert, because we did not know whether that was going to expand into other areas of Europe and the Mediterranean into our area, what the reactions of the combatant forces might be, what the Russians would do or the East Germans would do during that time period, and what we might be ordered to do. So we were, at that time I was married, but I did not see my wife for periods of time, because we were obviously told to stay close to the base or on the base in case we had to be sent someplace else. So that was the only exciting thing. Of course, there was plenty of humorous things that happened at various things. Having gone to Berlin and in uniform, which basically to us was, you had U.S. stamped all over your uniform, and some of the tourists on the other side were also Americans and British and so forth, and would see us talking in English and run up and ask us if we were American, and yes, look at the lapels.
Right, yeah, a little obvious.
Right, it should have been obvious, but
Right.
then again, the military in the United States, as we first had seen it, on newsreels and reported on the news was not exactly friendly towards any type of military. So unless you were living near a base at that time, you kind of hid the fact that you were in the military. When I went home on leave, they instructed us to basically try to keep a low profile, not to wear the uniform, unless you were going to a family type or party or something of that nature. Even to the extent of upon discharge, we were given the opportunity that, and their preference was that we change into civilian clothes as we left the base. So going from McGuire Air Force Base back home, I was in total civilian clothing. So even though it made no sense, I was carrying a duffel bag with me. So, but
Okay.
you just followed orders.
Right. I understand.
Right.
When you went out on the European economy, tell me about it. What was the interaction like with the nationals, so to speak?
It was a mixed reaction. Obviously, there were the German male population was decimated during World War II, and I was there 20 years after the war. The population at that time had grown accustomed to our being there and actually being a protective force and interacting with their own armies and air forces. So they were grateful in one respect, but there were several veterans that obviously German veterans, and we had our leaders were veterans of the war, so there was animosity and so forth. You had to be careful. We traveled in groups, when we were going on the economy and so forth, and we found it different in as much as the German children were given an opportunity to leave school at 14 and take up a trade. So that made it interesting to go into their stores. And one of the best comical instances happened when my roommate and I went into Kaiserslautern to look around. I wanted to get a music box for my girlfriend at the time, who turned out to be my wife later. But
Okay.
he had learned German in college, so he was going to accompany me. So I wanted a music box, and he said, "Oh, that's a Spieldose. I'll handle this." So we went into a local store, and you could see the music boxes and cuckoo clocks in the windows and so forth, the usual steins and souvenir trappings. So we walked in, and the girl came up and greeted us, and he started talking in German, having the extensive knowledge of 4 years in high school and some in college and so forth, and was taking over the conversation. And he asked her in German if she had music boxes, which he said, "Haben Sie ein Spieldose?" And she looked at him rather quizzically and so forth, and he repeatedly asked several times the same question, and she eventually looked at me, and I said, "We're looking for music boxes," and she said, "Oh, right this way." So
Right.
yeah, you didn't have to speak German on in the economy when you were going on there. They had mastered the English language by then and were very actually almost offended that you tried to speak their language.
Right.
So,
Okay. Well, I mean, England was right there.
Right, exactly. That's true too.
That had been going on for quite a while, I would
as
imagine.
well, yes.
So, okay, all right. Did you keep a diary?
No, I did not. Anything that we had, I did write daily letters home and so forth, and to my wife, and to when she was my fiance and so forth.
Mhm.
So those she kept and my parents kept, so we had somewhat of a diary over the years that, we basically were able to go back and look at and, see what we were doing at certain times during that time period. And that was our only diary type situation. So
Did you meet your? I'm a little curious or confused. Did you meet your wife in the States or in Germany?
no, in the States. Right?
Okay, okay. How did you get along with fellow officers? Well, I mean officers and fellow soldiers.
it was a very good relationship. On duty, obviously, it was a military installation, and you respected that. You respected rank and so forth, so there was no fraternization of that type at any time. But when you were on the economy or on bases, you would stay in your own NCO club, officers club, enlisted man's club, whatever that might be. But meeting on the streets and so forth after, if you were in uniform, obviously the initial salute, it would be, how you doing, Dave? I'm fine, Ray, this kind of stuff. How's the wife? Great. And your wife going well? Kids doing well in school and this kind of thing. So it was a normal type neighborly relationship.
Okay. Well, that's good. So where were you when you separated?
I was still in Germany. I was stationed at Ramstein, but working in Kinsbach. And again, even though the names of the squadron and detachments changed, I never moved from that. So it was always the same place, same area, different address. That's all.
Okay. What was your plan? What were you planning, or how did you embrace, or your thoughts formulated about separation? What were you thinking about? What were you planning?
My plans basically were to get out.
Okay.
In fact, I probably had one of Senior Master Sergeant Scott's shortest re-enlistment speeches. Having known how unmilitary I was off duty, and the feelings of myself and my anxiousness to get back to the States and my family, it was just, sit down, Dave, sign these papers, you've had your talk, we know where you're going.
Right.
So
And that was
it, right.
Okay, so what did you do? So you separated in Europe, or when you got back?
Back to the States at McGuire.
At McGuire. Okay,
Right.
so when you got out, what was the first thing that you did?
Well, having gone back to my family and so forth, and having had the 45-week education, which immediately translated into at least an associate's degree in electronics.
Oh, okay.
Back then. So there were several positions that were open. I thought I would go into the electronics field. But as things work out, that didn't happen. I went into a sales field and basically began civilian life as a bearing salesman in the Cleveland industrial areas and manufacturing firms back then.
Okay. How long did you do that?
For about 3 years. And then I switched to the oil industry, which I knew quite well, and sold industrial lubricants to steel mills and automobile factories and so forth for a number of years. I was a typical traveling salesman. I eventually worked up to a regional manager and had 3 sons during that time period, and got the message from the wife that I had to either come off the road or find a new family. So I came off the road, and
Sounded like an ultimatum.
that's correct.
Okay.
She was not going to raise them alone.
Right.
So,
No, that was clear.
understanding that, I found work closer to home that
Right.
kept me at home, and eventually went to work for the United States government.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to work downtown Cleveland, which essentially was the Navy Finance Center, which then changed almost immediately, or prior to my even starting. I was going to go in, but to the Navy Finance Center, but after testing and so forth, and a time period, it took a while to get in. It had changed to the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, so I went to DFAS and went into basically becoming worked in the dispersing department there and reclamations in DFAS in Cleveland. We actually, our job in that division was to pay bills, pay the president, pay the Navy and the Marine Corps, and eventually pay retirees of all, well, the Navy and the Marine Corps, and the Department of Energy, Department of Labor, and certain other things. It kept expanding, and as some of the other sites were closing, we assumed their responsibilities and duties. So it's one of 3 major DFS bases that are, or facilities that are still kept going in the United States. The others being Indianapolis and Columbus.
Did you retire from there?
Yes, I did.
Oh,
After a total of 26 years,
wow. Okay. Congratulations.
I left the government service and walked into civilian life.
Okay. Did you use your GI Bill for anything at all?
Well, obviously to take courses and things like this. Fortunately, some of my employers, both civilian and military, when it came to college courses and things like that, it was paid for as long as it was able to translate into increasing my knowledge of the field that I was in, was paid for by the government or the companies. So I was able to buy a home through the GI Bill and so forth, my first home. So yes, I utilized what I could, and it helped quite a bit.
Speaking of back to fellow soldiers, did you maintain any of your friendships, relationships after the service?
Still do today.
Really?
Keep in
Okay.
contact.
Cool.
In fact, lived close to a couple of the guys I was stationed with, and Florida was a nearby venue for us to go to. And half of our flight while in basic training was from Ohio, and the other half, and our sister flight, mostly from California and Florida. So basically kept in touch with quite a few of the guys that were in those, our sister flight and our a regular flight, and made good friends that have lasted this long.
Good for you. Just a couple more questions. Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yes, it has. It did initially, and it has kept basically me grounded in the United States of America. I prefer traveling and so forth here rather than going and visiting other sites and so forth. I believe we have it all here, and there's no reason to go anyplace else. And if it was up to myself to help defend in any way, obviously I'd stand with my fellow soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen. And today even the Coast Guard, which used to be a different branch, I believe they were the Department of Treasury, but no longer. So all of us together would stay and maintain the efforts to keep us free.
The Coast Guard was the Department of the Treasury?
It was a different, yeah, it was not the Department of Defense, it was something else. So,
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure what it was, but I knew up until very recently, well, by our standards anyway, that it was Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. So, and then as a sidelight, they are now honored just as they should have been, all along. So, there's 5 branches of the service, so to speak.
Okay, yeah, I know, yeah. Okay, last question. How did your service and experiences affect your life overall?
Well, as I said, they got me an education. They provided the background that I needed and the discipline that I needed to get through some very hard times. And of course, having had the first son while I was still in the military, even though my wife was back in the States, the total cost of her hospital stay, which back then you generally stayed at least 2 or 3 days, was $5 and something cents. So you can't compare.
Right, I understand. Yeah, got it.
But
Okay.
I obviously I'm aware of, especially where we're located now, close to various Air Force bases and facilities and so forth, of what goes on, how much the bases mean to the civilian population and the cities around them, and of what they're exactly doing to ensure that everything stays the same and that we're all free and to roam about the country, so to speak.
There you go. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, you know, I have some souvenirs and so forth that I was able to keep over the years and so forth, and I occasionally look back at those, and everything from ration cards that we had while we were stationed overseas, because you weren't allowed to just, you know, go here, there, and everywhere without having specifically a card to purchase things that were not necessary for yourself. So I keep those. I kept those, and I have those, and I show them to the grandkids, and you know, the kids have seen them and so forth. Fortunately for me, I'm still able to get into my uniform. I have a 1505 that I even brought it with me, that I can kick into and still button up, which I'm very proud of.
You want to show it to us?
Absolutely. I can. You know, I can show that quite easily. Here it is, guys. I was an E3 at the time. Became an E3 in '65.
Right.
This is a polyester type uniform,
Okay.
which came out of the original 505, which was the very, this, you know, as you can see, is still almost wrinkle free,
Right.
but having been kept basically in cedar chests and closets, have lasted a while.
Right.
From my experiences and so forth, I still maintain a calendar that I had back in Germany that went Montag, Mittwoch, you know, Donnerstag, Dienstag, Mittwoch, Freitag, and so forth and so on.
What is that?
A small calendar that for 1967 in German,
Okay.
that you know, I kept as a souvenir. I have, like I said, a ration card that was issued to me back then.
Can I see that?
Absolutely. I have, as some of the Air Force vets might remember, the tag that you put on your uniform to identify the flights you were assigned to. That was the 3407 there
Okay.
at Lackland in May of '65. When you wanted to drive in Europe, there I was able to get and maintain and keep my driver's license for transfer travel.
Hold that over just a little bit more.
Okay.
There we go.
All
Okay,
right.
good.
I had a pet. We had a dog, so we had to get it vaccinated and keep a record of our poodle's shots and so forth.
Right.
In order to get it back into the country.
Okay.
I have the booklet that was issued to me when I was welcomed by the Air Force to Ramstein Air Force Base.
Okay.
And it basically included what the facilities were. I know some of you are going to walk away and discuss, but we had 3 theaters, a golf course, 2 bowling alleys, 2 gyms, a Chinese restaurant, you know, 2 BXs, we called them,
Right.
and recreation centers, obviously, and every opportunity to continue educations and so forth. The NCO Club, on the 21st anniversary of the Air Force, basically the entertainment that was available to us, the people that came in, and so forth and so on, that full monthly schedule of everything from NATO bingo to the Monica and her group, Howard Stinson and his comedy troupe, Herman's Hermits, the USO shows that traveled through us, changed monthly. We saw everybody from, over the course of those years, Bob Hope to Johnny Cash to...
That's in front of that?
Absolutely. And these were issued to us monthly. So...
Hold on. Got it. Look, hold it up just a little higher.
Okay.
Hold on.
All right.
And got it. Got it. Beautiful.
All right. And
All right.
the back, hey, old Tex Redder came.
Hold it up.
Bobby Vinton
Hold
and
on.
so forth. We had Frankie Lane and his troupe
Put it
come
over here a
through.
little bit more and turn it. Good. 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 Good.
Okay. Had that.
Got it.
All right. My wife picked up while she was there some playing cards that the kids grew up playing with on the German economy. don't ask us what they were, but they basically translated, we guessed, into Christmas cards and St. Nicholas.
Hold them up. Just at least, yeah, hold on.
Okay.
Wait. Let me get a. Good. Next one.
Hey, guys.
All right.
Okay.
Angel.
Angel, the nutcracker.
Right.
You know.
Hold it.
Okay.
Got it.
This translated into a chimney sweep. You know.
Got it.
We made various jokes about her presence and so forth.
Hold on.
Okay. Okay.
Got it. Go ahead.
Teddy bears.
This
This
the
way.
glare. Turn it now.
Okay, there we
Good.
go.
Hold on.
Okay.
Got him.
And just, you know, other cards that
Okay.
we were able to maintain and so forth. The other things that I might be, okay, we had children's matinees for the kids, but mine were never big enough. But the movies that were going to play at the various theaters on base back then, they always came out with what was coming. This happened between October 13th to October 26th at the theaters in and around Ramstein and also Sembach. And it told us, and just for your information, The Silencers with Dean Martin was one of the movies. The Return of the Seven.
Right. Oh,
you
boy.
know, okay.
Magnificent Seven. Yeah.
All right. Dr. Zhivago.
Right.
Attack on the Iron Coast. The Devil's Brigade and things like this. The various movies that made it over to our theaters. Plus we also had Armed Forces Radio and Armed Forces Television, which the funniest thing I think I can relate to that was when I first got to Germany, some of the programs on television were High Noon, 12 O'Clock High, and another World War II series that because of protests by the German government showing the bombing scenes of the various cities that we were now stationed in, were taken off the air and replaced by Mike Douglas, Ed Sullivan, various shows that were more tame. So anything that had to do with World War II was removed from our own television stations. So, but we understood why.
Okay.
All right, and I always have a copy of my DD-214 available in case I'm asked for it, and I have my Ohio Veterans Card, which I basically used to get discounts at Lowe's and Home Depot and so forth. So I keep that with me at all times as well. Okay. And that pretty much is what I have, or was able to come up with at this time. So.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for a wonderfully extensive interview, which was just fine.
Okay.
And thank you also for your service.
I appreciate your inviting me, number one, and the opportunity to let some of this out. So.
Absolutely.